She had been invisible for 18 months. A nobody nurse in a busy Denver ER, dismissed, talked over, ignored. Then the doors blew open, blood everywhere, a 4-star Admiral dying on a gurney, and every senior doctor in the room scrambling to take charge. But the Admiral, barely conscious, chest heaving, vision going gray, lifted his trembling hand, not toward the chief of trauma, not toward the attending physicians calling out vitals. He raised it toward Maya Carter, the nurse standing in the back corner that nobody ever looked at twice. A military salute, precise, deliberate, and the room went dead silent. If this story already has you hooked, do me a favor. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night it started, Maya was charting labs in the corner of the Ravenwood Medical Center emergency department, eating her third granola bar of the shift because she'd missed lunch again. The ER smelled the way it always did, antiseptic and old coffee and the low-grade anxiety of people having the worst nights of their lives. It was a Tuesday. Nothing about Tuesday suggested the next several hours would take apart everything she'd spent 18 months building. She heard the radio chatter first, something about a multi-vehicle accident on I-70, incoming trauma, multiple casualties. She set down her granola bar and pulled her hair back tighter. The charge nurse, Donna Reyes, was already moving to Prep Bay 1, and the attending physicians were drifting in from wherever they'd been. Dr. Harlan Bosch, chief of trauma surgery, appeared from the direction of his office with his characteristic look of mild impatience, as though the emergency room had inconvenienced him by having emergencies. Bosch was 61, gray at the temples, and had the kind of resume that made him incapable of accepting that he might occasionally be wrong. He'd been at Ravenwood for 22 years. He spoke at conferences. He had a plaque. He also had a habit of dismissing Maya's clinical observations so reflexively that she suspected he'd stopped actually hearing her words and just responded to the sound of her voice. She wasn't the only one he dismissed, but she was the most recent addition to the department, and newness at Ravenwood apparently carried a shelf life of about 3 years before people started taking you seriously. 18 months in, she was still considered provisional in every sense that mattered. Carter. That was Dr. Priya Lund, the senior ER attending, already gloved. You're on triage support tonight. Stay out of the primary bay unless I call you. Got it, Maya said. She didn't argue. She'd learned not to. The ambulances hit the bay doors at 11:47 p.m. 3 vehicles. The first 2 carried civilian casualties from the crash, a family of 4, a college student with a broken arm and a concussion. Standard trauma work, nothing that required the whole department to mobilize. The third gurney was different. She heard the paramedic before she saw the patient. Male, late 60s, blunt chest trauma, suspected internal hemorrhage, BP dropping. We almost lost him twice on the way in. And then the doors were open and the gurney was through, and Maya was standing near the supply corridor when she got her first clear look at the man on it. He was in civilian clothes, but that told her nothing. What told her something was the way his body was carrying the injury. The asymmetrical chest rise, the color of his nail beds, the particular stillness that wasn't unconsciousness, but was something else, something controlled, something trained. He was managing his own breathing, consciously. Even now. There were 4 people in dark suits who came in behind the gurney, and 2 of them were on phones immediately, and one of them, a woman with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone who gave orders for a living, looked around the emergency department with the specific expression of someone assessing a situation for threats. Name? Bosch was already at the gurney. Admiral Raymond Voss, one of the suits said. Retired. He was traveling privately. The temperature in the room changed. Not dramatically, just a degree or two, the way it does when something shifts from ordinary emergency to something that will require paperwork in triplicate, and probably phone calls to people whose titles are abbreviated. Bosch moved fast. He was good at his job, whatever else Maya thought of him, calling out orders, getting lines started, calling for imaging. Lund was on the other side of the gurney running her own assessment, the room filled with the controlled noise of a trauma response working the way it was supposed to. Maya stayed where she was told to stay. She watched. She watched the Admiral's chest. She watched the way his left side moved, or didn't move, compared to his right. She watched the oxygen saturation readout and the blood pressure numbers, and the way his color was doing something subtle and wrong that the numbers hadn't fully caught up to yet. Dr. Bosch? She said it the way she always said things. Not loud, not aggressive, just clear. Bosch didn't look up. Carter, I need you on line set up for Bay 2. Sir, I think he may have a splenic laceration. The presentation is, he has chest trauma. We're managing chest trauma. He did look up then, briefly, with the particular expression he reserved for her. Not quite contempt, but the closest clinical equivalent. Thank you. Dismissed. She went to Bay 2. She set up the line. She checked the supplies. She stood where she was told to stand and she watched the clock, and she thought about the way the Admiral's left upper quadrant had looked on the quick visual assessment she'd managed before being redirected. 12 minutes passed. Then she heard Lund's voice go sharp in Bay 1. BP is crashing. We're losing pressure and I don't know why. Maya was already moving. She pushed through the curtain. Bosch was recalibrating. She could see it on his face, the moment where his certainty was fracturing and he was rapidly reprocessing. Lund was calling for the crash cart. 2 nurses were moving. Splenic laceration, Maya said. Left upper quadrant, probably grade 3 or 4. He needs surgical intervention now, not in 20 minutes. We don't have imaging confirmation, Bosch started. He'll be dead before imaging confirms it. She was already at the Admiral's side, checking the rigidity of his abdomen, watching his face. Sir, can you hear me? I need you to tell me if you're feeling pain specifically in your left shoulder. The Admiral's eyes opened. They were dark brown and completely alert in a way that didn't match how badly he was hurt, and they focused on her with an immediacy that had nothing to do with delirium. Yes, he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. Left shoulder, 4 minutes now. Care's sign. Referred pain from a ruptured spleen, exactly where it should be, presenting exactly when it should. He needs to go to the OR, Maya said. Right now. Bosch stared at her. Something moved across his face. The recognition, probably, that she was right, and the calculation of how to proceed in a way that preserved the hierarchy. Get Dr. Weston on the phone, he said finally, to nobody in particular. Tell him we need him in the OR in 10 minutes. It wasn't an acknowledgement. It was just the next order. Maya stepped back. That was when the Admiral's hand came up. He was on supplemental oxygen, 1 IV already running, blood pressure still dropping. His right hand lifted from the gurney with the deliberateness of someone who had decided to do a thing and was going to do it regardless of the cost. His fingers came together, his wrist aligned, a military salute, directed at Maya Carter, standing in the corner of Trauma Bay 1 in her scrubs and non-slip shoes, holding a blood pressure cuff. Nobody in the room moved. Bosch's mouth opened slightly and then closed. Donna Reyes, who had been in this ER for 15 years and claimed nothing surprised her anymore, stopped mid-reach toward a supply drawer. Maya looked at the Admiral. His eyes hadn't left her face. Sir, she said, quiet, just for him. We need to move you now. I know, he said. He lowered his hand. I know. They moved him. Oh, the OR took him at 12:09 a.m. Weston confirmed the splenic laceration within 4 minutes of opening. Grade 4, as it turned out. Worse than Maya's estimate, which meant the timing had been even closer than it had looked. Maya went back to her other patients. She checked on the family from the accident. 2 kids with minor lacerations, a father with a broken wrist, a mother with a concussion that needed monitoring. She did the work. She charted. She drank the rest of her cold coffee and ate the second half of her granola bar standing at the nurse's station. The 4 people in dark suits had not left. They were stationed in the waiting area with the particular stillness of people who were waiting not for news, but for the situation to resolve so they could begin managing it. The woman with the gray hair had made several phone calls, all of which had been short and quiet and apparently conclusive. Around 1:30 a.m., one of the suits, younger, male, with the kind of jawline that suggested he'd spent time somewhere with a strict physical fitness requirement, approached the nurse's station. Nurse Carter? She looked up. Yes, I'm Agent Marcus Webb, Department of Defense Liaison. He showed identification that looked real, but then everything about him looked very specifically like something that was designed to look real. I understand you were the treating nurse on Admiral Voss. I was one of the staff present, yes. He specifically requested to speak with you when he's out of surgery. That's not unusual. Patients sometimes want to speak with Miss Carter. He said it differently that time, not dismissively, more like someone setting down a piece of information carefully to see how she reacted. The Admiral was very specific about you, by name, before he was brought in here. She held his gaze for a moment. I'll be available when he's out of recovery, she said. How is he doing? Stable? Webb studied her face. You're not surprised. By the salute? Or by you being here? He didn't answer that. He just looked at her a moment longer, then nodded once and returned to the waiting area. Maya turned back to her charts. Her hands were completely steady. Mosim. Dr. Bosch found her in the medication room at 2:15 a.m. He came in without knocking, which was characteristic, and stood there for a moment in the way that meant he was trying to decide how to begin a conversation he hadn't entirely planned. The Admiral's going to be fine, he said. Good. Weston says the diagnosis was accurate, the laceration. Okay? You should have brought it up differently. He crossed his arms. The way you interrupted the primary team assessment, he would have died, Maya said. She wasn't accusatory. She was just stating the fact the way you state facts, without decoration. Bosch's jaw moved. The point is procedure, Carter. You don't override an attending's management protocol based on a visual assessment from across the room. That's not how this department operates. I understand. I'm not sure you do. He leaned against the counter, apparently settling in. I've been watching you since you joined this department, and I'll tell you what I see. Someone who's competent, technically, but who has a problem with authority. Who thinks she sees things that trained physicians miss. Who positions herself as Dr. Bosch. She turned to face him. I called the diagnosis. The patient is alive. I'm not going to apologize for that. His face did something complicated. Not anger exactly, something closer to discomfort. The specific discomfort of a person who is accustomed to being the final word encountering someone who simply does not accept that arrangement. There'll be a review, he said. Standard protocol after any unplanned intervention. I understand. He left. Maya went back to her charts. 3 hours left in her shift. The ER had quieted to its normal overnight hum. A woman with kidney stones in Bay 4, a teenager with a dislocated shoulder in Bay 6, the ordinary human suffering of 3 a.m. She documented everything carefully. She always did. Jeanette. The review was scheduled for the following morning, which meant Maya's shift ended at 7. She went home, slept 4 hours, and came back at 11 for a meeting in the hospital's administrative conference room on the 4th floor. The room had a long table and a window overlooking the parking garage. Bosch was there. Lund was there. Hospital Administrator Gerald Fitch, who had the energy of a man perpetually managing a crisis he'd created for himself, sat at the head of the table. There was also a woman Maya didn't know, 40s, professional, with a tablet and a look of focused attention that suggested she was there to observe rather than participate. Thank you for coming in on your off hours, Fitch said, in a tone that implied she hadn't had a choice. Of course, Maya said. The review itself was fairly standard. They walked through the timeline, the clinical decision, the process. Maya answered every question directly and without elaboration. She'd been in rooms like this before, in other contexts, and she knew that the less you said, the less they could use. Bosch presented his version of events. In his version, he had been managing the situation appropriately and was in the process of reassessing when Maya had intervened prematurely. The diagnosis had turned out to be accurate, yes, but the approach had been outside the bounds of proper protocol. Miss Carter, Fitch said, do you have anything to add? Only that the patient survived, Maya said. That's not the issue under review. Then what is? Fitch adjusted his glasses. The issue is that a junior nurse with 18 months of experience at this institution overrode the clinical judgment of an attending physician during a live trauma response. Regardless of the outcome, that's a serious... She was right. This came from the woman with the tablet, who had not spoken until now. Fitch looked at her. Dr. Ewan, this is an internal... I'm aware of what it is. Dr. Ewan set the tablet flat on the table. I was asked by the Admiral's office to be present at this review, and I'm telling you, as a trauma surgeon with 23 years of practice, that her diagnosis was correct, her timeline was accurate, and the patient would have gone into hemorrhagic shock within minutes if someone hadn't intervened. She looked at Maya for a moment, something measuring in her expression. Whether that intervention followed proper departmental protocol is a question for your HR people. Whether it saved a man's life is not. The room was quiet. Fitch looked at Bosch. Bosch looked at the table. There will still need to be documentation, Fitch said finally. Document whatever you need to document, Dr. Ewan said. The Admiral is requesting a meeting with Miss Carter this afternoon. I'd suggest you clear her schedule. Raymond Voss was in a private room on the surgical recovery floor, sitting up in his bed with the particular posture of a person who is going to sit up in their bed regardless of what their body was telling them. He was 67, with gray hair cut close and a face that had seen weather in the way that some people's faces do. There was an IV in his left arm and monitors running, and he looked like a man recovering from significant trauma, which he was, and also like a man who had decided to proceed with the day's business, which he also was. Agent Webb was in the corner. The woman with gray hair, who had apparently not left the hospital at all, was standing near the window. Miss Carter, Voss said when Maya came in. Sit down, please. I'm fine standing, she said. Something like a smile crossed his face. I remember. That landed differently than she expected. She pulled up the chair. You knew who I was, she said. Not a question. I've known for about 8 months. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position. Finding you took considerably longer than that. I wasn't hiding. No. He studied her. But the people who wanted you gone were very thorough. She held very still, 18 months of holding very still, and this was the moment it was all going to unspool. She could feel it. We don't need to do this today, she said. You're 12 hours out of surgery. I know exactly how far out of surgery I am. He looked at Webb briefly. Leave us. Webb looked like he wanted to object. He didn't. He and the gray-haired woman both stepped out, and the door closed, and it was just the two of them and the sound of the monitors. Operation Sandline, Voss said. The word, the name, moved through her like cold water. That's classified, she said. Yes, it is. He paused. You saved 14 men that day, including me. She didn't say anything. You were left behind, he continued, his voice flat and factual, like he was reading from a report he'd memorized. The mission was officially listed as a failure. Casualties were recorded as unavoidable losses in a hostile engagement. You were listed as a deserter. I know what I was listed as. I know you know. He looked at her steadily. I've been trying to correct it for 3 years. There were people with considerably more institutional interest in not correcting it. Why are you here? She asked. Not coldly, just directly. The accident tonight wasn't an accident, he said. The vehicle I was in was run off the road, deliberately. He let that sit a moment. Someone knows I've been reopening the investigation into Sandline, and they decided to send a message. Maya looked at her hands, then at the window, then back at him. You're telling me this because you think I'm in danger. I'm telling you this because you already are. He reached toward the small table beside his bed and slid a manila folder across the blanket toward her. This is everything I've been able to recover. It's not complete. There are names in there you'll recognize. She didn't touch the folder yet. Admiral, she said, I came to Denver to be a nurse. That's it. I'm done with the rest of it. I know, he said quietly. I know that's what you want. Then why? Because the rest of it isn't done with you. He looked at her with something that wasn't pity. She wouldn't have tolerated pity, but was something older and more worn. They found you, Maya. Last night proves it. Whatever you've built here, it won't survive what's coming unless you're ready for it. She sat with that. The monitors beeped. Down the hallway, someone was paging a doctor. She picked up the folder. She didn't open it, she just held it. "The salute," she said. "In the trauma bay, with everyone watching." "Yes." "That wasn't an accident either." He looked at her without flinching. "No, it wasn't." She stood up. The folder was in her hands. She was already cataloging exits, options, the shape of what came next. "Get some sleep," she said. "You're still bleeding internally from the smaller vessels, and you probably don't feel it yet, but you will at about 4 this afternoon." "How do you—" "Because I know what grade 4 splenic lacerations feel like at 12 hours post-op." She moved toward the door. "I'll have your nurse increase your monitoring interval." "Maya." She stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened to you, for how long it took." She stood there a moment, the folder pressed against her side, the weight of it not quite physical. "Get some sleep," she said again, and she left. She walked down the hall past the nurse's station, past 2 orderlies with a supply cart, past a woman in a visitor's badge who was looking at her phone. She turned the corner toward the elevator bank and stopped. Agent Webb was waiting there. Not threatening, just waiting, with his hands at his sides and the look of someone who had been instructed to be patient. "Miss Carter," he said. "What do you want?" "We need to talk about your records." She waited. "We ran a standard background check this morning," he said, "as part of our security protocol for the Admiral's medical team, and there's—" He paused, choosing the words carefully. "There are some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind where your employment history before Ravenwood exists on paper but doesn't verify on deeper search. The kind where your nursing certification appears correct, but the issuing institution has no record of you. The kind—" He stopped again. "Miss Carter, whoever erased your records did a thorough job, but they didn't anticipate us looking." She held the folder a little tighter. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. It was the wrong thing to say, and they both knew it, and the look on Webb's face was the look of someone who had expected that exact response. "The Admiral told me you'd say that," he said. "He also told me to tell you—" He glanced down at something on his phone, clearly reading a message. "That the people who did the erasing have been looking for the original files for 3 years, and they haven't found them because you have them." She didn't move. She didn't react. "Third floor supply closet," she said finally. "Room 312. There's a locker in the back. I need 20 minutes. Webb nodded. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited for the doors to open. And while she waited, she thought about how she'd been careful for 18 months. She thought about the apartment she'd rented under a name that was real, but not entirely hers. She thought about the job she'd taken because it was the one place her real training would be useful without being obvious. She thought about the 18 months of being Maya Carter, unremarkable nurse, background noise, the person nobody looked at twice. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The folder in her hands had a name on the tab that she hadn't looked at yet, and now she turned it toward her and read it. Her own name, her real name, the one she'd stopped using. Below it, a case number. Below that, a date. 3 weeks from today. Below that, a single typed line. Review hearing. Classified. Respondents to be named. The elevator doors slid closed. Somewhere in this hospital, a 4-star Admiral was recovering from what was not an accident. Somewhere in Denver, someone had made a decision to stop waiting for the past to stay buried. And Maya Carter, whatever her name actually was, stood in that elevator with a folder she already knew would change everything, and felt something she hadn't felt in 18 months. Not fear. Something older than fear and more dangerous. The elevator reached the 3rd floor and the doors opened, and she stepped out into the hall. The supply closet on the 3rd floor smelled like bleach and old cardboard, the kind of room nobody visited unless they needed something specific and already knew where it was. Maya had found it 2 weeks into her job at Ravenwood, the way she found most things, methodically, without announcing it, during a shift when the floor was busy enough that nobody tracked where anyone went. The locker in the back was a maintenance unit, heavy steel, combination lock, the kind that hadn't been updated since the hospital's last renovation in 2009. She'd put her own lock on it the day after she arrived. Nobody had questioned it. Nobody had even noticed. She worked the combination now without looking at her hands. Inside, a waterproof case, small enough to carry in a large purse. Inside that, 2 hard drives, a set of documents printed on paper that didn't exist in any digital record, a military ID that had been officially voided 3 years ago, and a phone that had never been activated on any network traceable to her current identity. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the case, and she thought about the date on the folder. 3 weeks. Whoever had scheduled that review hearing had done it without contacting her, without notifying her, without giving her any choice about whether she'd be present. That was intentional. The whole point of a hearing scheduled without the subject's knowledge was to control the terms of engagement before the subject could prepare. She put the case under her arm, relocked the empty locker, and left. Webb was waiting where she'd told him to wait, near the elevator bank, pretending to look at his phone. He was better at the stillness than most DoD liaisons she'd encountered. He didn't shift his weight, didn't check the time, didn't do any of the things people did when they were trying to look casual and weren't. She gave him credit for that. "We need somewhere private," she said. "There's a conference room on the 2nd floor the Admiral's team has been using." "Not the hospital, somewhere outside." He looked at her, then at the case under her arm, then back at her face. "Okay," he said. "Give me 10 minutes. I need to clear my remaining patients with the charge nurse first." "How long?" 20 minutes. Meet me at the east parking structure, level 2. He nodded and walked away without asking what was in the case, which told her either he'd been well briefed or he was smart enough to know she wouldn't tell him yet. Possibly both. She went to find Donna Reyes. Donna was at the nurse's station, going through a medication reconciliation with the focused energy of someone who ran this floor with an iron hand wrapped in a very thin layer of professional warmth. She'd been doing this for 15 years, and she'd seen everything, which meant she registered Maya's expression immediately, without commenting on it. "You need to go," Donna said, not looking up. "I have 3 patients." "Kim can take them. What's going on?" "I'm not sure yet." Donna did look up then. She had sharp brown eyes and the particular perception of someone who had read people's faces in crisis situations so many times she could identify 17 different categories of not okay. "You coming back tonight?" "I don't know." A pause. "The DoD people?" "Yes." Donna looked at her for another second, then looked back down at her paperwork. "Kim," she called across the station, "you're taking Carter's panel. She's got a consult." Kim, a second-year nurse who asked very few questions and was better for it, nodded and came over for the handoff. Maya gave her the panel rundown in 2 minutes. The kidney stone patient had been discharged. The teenager with the shoulder was waiting for radiology. The woman in Bay 8 had a blood pressure that needed rechecking at 2 p.m. Kim wrote it down without comment. Maya signed off and walked. Webb had a black SUV with government plates parked on level 2 of the east structure, because of course he did. He was leaning against it when she arrived, and the gray-haired woman, who had apparently been attached to Webb like a shadow, was in the front passenger seat. "Who's she?" Maya asked. "Commander Nora Hatch," Webb said. "NSA. She's been on the Sand Line reopening for 14 months. Maya looked at the SUV. She looked at the exits. She looked at the vehicle's plates, and then at the structure's security cameras. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Safe house," Webb said. 15 minutes from here. "I need to make a call first." "To who?" "Nobody you need to know about." She pulled out her personal cell, not the one from the waterproof case, her regular phone, and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "It's me," she said when the line connected. "I need you to move. Yes, now. Take everything." A pause, listening. "I'll explain later. Just go." She hung up. Webb was watching her with that careful stillness. "Who was that?" "Someone who helps me keep things sorted," she said, which was true in the way that technically accurate things sometimes are, and she got in the vehicle. The safe house was a rental property in a residential neighborhood in Aurora. Ordinary house, 2-car garage, the kind of block where nobody looked twice at government vehicles because there was a VA clinic 4 streets over and they came through regularly. Inside, it looked like a temporary field office. Folding tables, laptops, a whiteboard with photographs and strings of text that Maya cataloged in the 3 seconds she had before Webb directed her to a chair. She sat. She set the waterproof case on the table. Commander Hatch came around the table and sat across from her. Up close, she was younger than Maya had thought, maybe 52, 53, with the particular kind of tiredness that came not from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying something. "You know why you're here," Hatch said. "The Admiral's vehicle was deliberately run off the road," Maya said. "Someone's been trying to stop the Sandline investigation, and now they know he's found me." Close. Hatch opened a laptop and turned it so Maya could see the screen. The vehicle incident was Tuesday, the same night we detected an intrusion attempt on the Federal Records database. Someone was trying to access a sealed file. She tapped the screen. "Your sealed file. They didn't get in, but they tried, and the attempt tells us two things. They know who you are, and they're worried about what you have." Maya looked at the case on the table. "We need to know what's in there," Webb said from across the room. "I know you do. Will you show us?" She sat with that for a moment. The thing about the case was that it represented 3 years of her life, 3 years of staying alive while officially not existing, 3 years of keeping the evidence close enough to matter and far enough from anyone who might use it wrong. She hadn't trusted anyone with it. She hadn't been sure she could. She opened the case. The documents went on the table one at a time. The hard drives, the ID, the handwritten notes she'd kept in a system only she understood on paper, because paper couldn't be remotely wiped. Hatch picked up the first document and read for approximately 45 seconds without speaking. Then she looked up. "Where did you get these?" she said. Her voice was different. Something had shifted in it. "I kept copies," Maya said, "before they took everything else." "This is a mission debrief signed by General Hollis Crane." "Yes." Hollis Crane retired 2 years ago. He is currently consulting for Meridian Defense Group and sitting on the board of 2 major military contractors. Hatch set the document down with deliberate care. And according to this document, he authorized the decision to leave a 3-person medical team in a hostile zone and report them as non-recoverable. 2-person team, Maya said. By the time they made that decision, Corpsman Tate Arden was already dead. The room was quiet. Webb moved to the table. He looked at the document and then at Maya and then at the document again. "He's been blocking the investigation," he said. "Every time the Admiral's team got close to something solid, the request got denied. Resources reassigned, witnesses suddenly unavailable." "I know," Maya said. "You've known it was Crane," Hatch said. It wasn't a question. "I've known it was Crane for 3 years. Maya looked at her hands. They were steady, which was not a given. "I also knew that until someone had the standing to reopen the file and the documentation to support it, there was nothing I could do without getting myself killed in the process, or disappeared. Again." Hatch sat back. She picked up one of the hard drives and turned it over in her hands. "What's on this?" "Mission logs, GPS coordinates of the extraction point, radio communications from the 48 hours before the abandonment, including a direct order from Crane telling the extraction team to abort, and a falsified report filed the following day claiming the original order had never been given." Maya paused. "And a video file. 18 minutes long. Tate Arden filmed it on his personal device. He knew something was wrong with the mission parameters 2 days in." Hatch and Webb exchanged a look. "He sent it to you?" Webb asked. "He gave me the drive the morning before he died." She said it flatly, the way she always said things that she'd already processed and moved past because she'd had no other choice. "He said it was insurance. He didn't know what it was insurance against yet. Neither did I." Hatch stood up. She went to the whiteboard and looked at the photographs on it, a web of names and dates and organizational connections, and she found Hollis Crane's photograph near the top right, connected by a red string to 2 other names Maya also recognized. And she put her finger on his face. "He has people watching this investigation," she said. "The intrusion attempt Tuesday night was amateur, which means it wasn't Crane directly, it was someone downstream, someone he deployed to monitor and report." She turned. "He doesn't know what you have, he just knows you exist." He's been trying to figure out if I matter," Maya said. And last night answered that question for him. The salute. The Admiral looking for you publicly, in a hospital, with an entire staff watching. Hatch shook her head. "It put you in the open." "The Admiral knew that." "Yes, he did." A pause. He made a calculated decision. Maya looked at the whiteboard. She looked at the photographs. She looked at the strings connecting names, all of it the bureaucratic anatomy of something that had cost Tate Arden his life, and cost her the 3 years after it. And she thought about the fact that she'd been a nurse for 18 months, had been careful for 18 months, had eaten granola bars at a nurse's station and charted labs and taken Bosch's condescension and built something small and workable in Denver. "I need to go back to the hospital," she said. Hatch blinked. "Excuse me?" "I have patients. I have a shift tomorrow morning." "Miss Carter." "Maya." It came out sharper than she'd intended. "Sorry, but it's Maya." A pause. "Maya," Hatch said more carefully, "you understand that the moment you walked out of that hospital today with what's in that case, you became a significant person of interest in a federal investigation. You can't just go back to—" "I understand that." Maya stood up. "I also understand that the moment I stop doing my job is the moment people here start asking questions I'm not ready to answer on their timeline. The review hearing is in 3 weeks. Until then, I need to look exactly like what I've been looking like for 18 months. Webb looked uncertain. "And if Crane's people know I exist," she said. "They've known for approximately 12 hours. If they were going to move on me tonight, they would have done it before I walked into a federal safe house with 2 NSA officers." She picked up her regular phone. "I need a car back to the hospital." Hatch studied her for a long moment. "The drives stay here," she said. "Copies," Maya said. "The originals go back in the case." "Maya." "Commander." She met Hatch's eyes. "I've kept those files alive for 3 years because I never gave anyone else the only copy. That's not stubbornness. That's how I'm still breathing." Another long pause. Then Hatch nodded. "Webb will drive you," she said. "And I want daily check-ins. Twice weekly." "Daily." "Every other day," Maya said, "and I pick the time." Hatch looked at her with something that was either irritation or the beginning of respect. Possibly both. "Fine," she said. "But if anything changes—" "You'll know before I finish the sentence," Maya said. "I've done this before." Webb dropped her out of the hospital's east entrance at 4:47 p.m., and she went back inside like nothing had happened, which was the only option available and also the one she was most practiced at. She stopped by the surgical recovery floor first, checked in on Admiral Voss through the window of his room. He was asleep, which was the right thing to be, and his monitors looked stable, which was also the right thing, and then she went to find Donna. Donna was at the end of a shift handoff and had the look of someone running on coffee in sheer professional velocity. She clocked Maya coming down the hall and finished her handoff in 60 seconds flat before turning. "You good?" she asked. "Fine," Maya said. "You don't look fine." "I look the same as I always look." "That's what I said." Donna handed her a tablet. "Kim's notes on your panel. The kidney stone came back, by the way. Different stone, different side. I put her in bay 6. Maya took the tablet and scanned the notes. "Has Dr. Bosch been around?" "In and out. He's been in a mood since the Admiral's people sent over some kind of formal commendation for the nursing staff's role in the trauma response." Maya paused. "What kind of commendation?" "The written kind, with a DOD header." Donna tilted her head slightly. "Specifically mentioned your assessment by name." Maya absorbed that. The Admiral hadn't waited. He'd moved the same afternoon, fired a shot that was visible, documented, and extremely difficult to walk back. She thought about what Hatch had said. He made a calculated decision. "Bosch wasn't happy about it," Donna said. "I imagine not." Fitch called him into the office. "I don't know what was said, but Bosch came out looking like someone had rearranged his furniture without asking." A slight pause. "He's not going to be easier to work with." "He was never easy to work with." "Easier is a relative term." Donna shrugged. "Just watch your back is all I'm saying. Men like Bosch don't take correction quietly. They get quieter first, and then they act." Maya thought about that, about the ways that warning applied to several different layers of her current situation simultaneously. "Thanks, Donna," she said. "Don't thank me." Just do your job and don't die. It was meant as a figure of speech. Maya nodded like it was. She worked her shift the next morning. She was back at 6, charting by 6:15, checking on her panel by 6:30. The hospital moved around her in its normal rhythms, and she moved through it, and it was almost convincing. Almost the ordinary version of her life here, the one she'd built and maintained and been careful about. Almost, except that Dr. Lund caught up with her near the medication room at 8:40 and said, without preamble, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Lund was difficult to read on a good day. She was a competent physician who operated primarily in the mode of controlled efficiency, and she kept her emotional register so compressed that most of the staff found her cold. Maya had never found her cold. She'd found her careful, which was different, and she'd also noticed that Lund watched more than she spoke, which was a quality Maya respected. "Sure," Maya said. They went into the medication room and Lund closed the door. "I want to ask you something," Lund said, "and I want you to know that whatever you tell me, it doesn't leave this room." Maya waited. "Your assessment of the Admiral," Lund said. "The speed of it, the specificity. You diagnosed a grade 4 splenic laceration from across the room in under 4 minutes in a patient who presented primarily with chest trauma." She looked at Maya evenly. "That's not nursing school. That's not even the standard clinical training we expect from our mid-level staff. That's something else." A long pause. "I was thorough," Maya said. "You were something," Lund said. "I've been doing emergency medicine for 16 years, and I've trained with some excellent people. And I'm telling you, that's not a standard skill set. It's the kind of pattern recognition you get from working in environments where missing the diagnosis doesn't just mean a bad outcome. It means someone dies right in front of you." Maya didn't move. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Lund continued. "I'm not even asking you to explain. I just want you to know that I saw what you did, and that I am—" She paused, choosing the word. "I'm sorry for the way the team has handled you here. I have not advocated for you the way I should have." It was such an unexpected thing to say that Maya took a moment to process it. "Dr. Lund, Priya," she said it firmly. "I think we can drop the formality." Maya looked at her. "You're not the one who made this hard." "I also didn't make it easier," Lund said, "which is its own kind of failure." She picked up a medication packet from the counter, turning it over in her hands the way people do when they need something to do with their hands. "The DoD people. They're still in the building." "I know." "Webb, the liaison. He was asking questions at the nursing station this morning about your schedule, your prior employment history." Maya kept her expression neutral. "What did people say?" "What people here know, which is almost nothing." Lund set the packet down. "Donna told him your records were confidential and walked away. Kim told him she didn't know anything, which is true. Bosch," a pause. "Bosch told him you were a competent nurse but had a habit of overstepping." Of course he did. Did Webb seem satisfied with that? He seemed like a man who expected those answers and already knew they weren't the whole picture. Lund looked at her directly. "Maya, I don't know what's happening. I don't need to know. But if you need something, coverage, documentation, someone to back your clinical decisions in writing, I want you to ask me." Maya looked at her for a moment. 16 months of Priya Lund walking past her in the corridor. 16 months of appropriate but impersonal professional distance. And here, now, an offer. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Lund nodded once and left. Maya stood in the medication room alone for about 30 seconds, and then she went back to work. The thing she hadn't told Hatch, the thing she hadn't told anyone, was that the hard drives contained more than mission logs and Arden's video. They also contained financial records. 3 years of careful archiving, routed through dead drops and encrypted transfers, and a network of people who didn't know each other's names, building a paper trail that documented exactly how Meridian Defense Group had profited from the decisions made around Operation Sandline. It wasn't just that Crane had abandoned her team to cover up a failed mission. It was that the mission's failure had been profitable. A recontracting opportunity. A competitor eliminated. 7 figures, redirected, documented in records that had never been meant to exist. She'd known this for 2 years. She'd been waiting for the right conditions to surface it. 3 weeks to the review hearing, the Admiral in recovery 3 floors up, Webb asking questions at the nurse's station, Hatch with her whiteboard and her careful expressions. The conditions were changing faster than she'd planned for. She was checking vitals in Bay 3 when her pager went off. Not the hospital pager, the small secondary device she kept on her belt that looked like a backup pager, but wasn't. A single sequence of numbers that meant, "We have a problem." She went to the supply corridor, checked the secondary phone she kept in her left scrub pocket, the one from the waterproof case, activated 2 nights ago, and found a text message from a number she knew by heart. They pulled your file. Not the hospital's. The original service record. Someone with Class 3 clearance ran it at 0600 this morning. Be careful. She read it twice, then she deleted it. Class 3 clearance. That was not someone acting independently. That was someone with institutional access and institutional cover, which meant Crane wasn't deploying freelancers anymore. He was using people inside. She put the phone away and walked back to her patients. She passed Webb in the hallway on the way. He was talking to someone she didn't recognize, male, 50s, in civilian clothes that sat wrong on him, the way civilian clothes always sit wrong on people who've spent 30 years in uniform. She caught the last fragment of their conversation as she passed. Confirmed the file access was unauthorized from our end. She kept walking. She didn't turn around. But she noted the man's face, the way he held his hands, the particular angle of his shoulders when he realized she'd walked by. She'd seen that angle before. Not in Denver, not in any hospital. In a different kind of corridor, in a different kind of building, in a context that was supposed to be sealed and over and gone. She turned the corner and stopped. Her hands, for the first time since this had started, were not completely steady. She pressed them flat against the wall and breathed through it. 2 counts in, 4 counts out, the old rhythm that her body still remembered even when she didn't want it to. And she thought about the man's face, about where she'd seen it, about what his presence in this building meant. Because if he was here, then it wasn't just that Crane knew she existed, it meant someone had decided that 3 weeks was too long to wait. She counted to 4 and pushed off the wall. The man's name was Garrett Solis. She hadn't known it then. 3 years ago, in a concrete building in a country she wasn't supposed to be in, she'd only seen him twice, both times in the hallway outside the operations room where the sandline debrief was being conducted. He'd been in uniform then. He'd had the look of someone who was present at a meeting not to participate but to observe and report back. She'd noted him the way she noted everything in those days. Automatically, precisely, without attaching significance until significance became necessary. It was necessary now. She walked back to the nurse's station and pulled up her patient charts on the terminal, hands moving through the routine with the muscle memory of 18 months. And she thought about what Solis's presence meant with the other part of her mind, the part that had never fully stopped running threat assessments, no matter how many granola bars she ate at how many ordinary nurses' stations. He wasn't here for Webb. The body language had been wrong for that. They'd been talking, but the dynamic was off. The kind of off you got when 2 people were sharing a space but not actually coordinating. Which meant Solis was here through a different channel. Which meant Crane had at least 2 separate lines of access into this situation, and they might not know about each other, and that was either an advantage or a problem depending on how the next few hours went. She paged Webb from the nurse's station. Not her secondary phone, the hospital pager system, visible and logged. She wrote, "Need to speak, non-urgent, my timeline." Then she went back to her patients. But Webb found her in the break room at 11:15. She was eating a sandwich she didn't particularly want because she'd learned a long time ago that you ate when you had the opportunity because you didn't always know when the next one would come. He came in, checked the room, closed the door. "You paged," he said. "The man you were talking to in the hallway this morning," she said. "50s, gray suit, walks like he spent time in the 82nd. Webb's expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters. "You made him." "He made himself." "Who is he?" A pause. "His name is Garrett Solis. He's DOD, but he's not on my team. He was flagged to us this morning as someone who accessed your original service record at 0600. "You know he accessed it." "We flagged the access." "Yes." "And you were talking to him." I was trying to determine if the access was authorized through a channel I wasn't aware of. Webb sat down across from her. It wasn't. He's operating independently. For Crane, Webb's jaw tightened. We believe so. She took another bite of her sandwich. He recognized me in the hallway. Did he approach you? No, but he knew I'd seen him, and he knows I knew who he was. She set the sandwich down. He's going to move faster now. Whatever he was sent here to assess, he's assessed it. He'll report back within the hour if he hasn't already. We can bring him in for questioning. On what grounds? Accessing a classified file? His people will have a cover story ready in 20 minutes. And then Crane knows we're moving and he goes dark. She shook her head. Don't touch Solis. Not yet. Webb looked at her with the expression she was starting to recognize as his version of conflicted. Commander Hatch needs to know about this. Call her, but tell her not to change anything visible on the outside of this building. She picked the sandwich back up. I need today to look exactly the same as yesterday. And what are you going to do? My job, she said. Same as I've been doing. He stared at her for a moment. You know, the Admiral said you'd be the calmest person in the room. The Admiral has a romantic view of operational stress. She finished the sandwich. Call Hatch. At 1:15, Admiral Voss had a complication. It was the kind of complication she'd mentioned to him the previous afternoon, the secondary bleeding from smaller vessels that a grade 4 laceration almost always produced in the 12 to 24-hour post-operative window. His blood pressure dropped 14 points in 6 minutes, and the monitors alarmed, and the surgical recovery floor went into rapid response mode. Maya was there before the overhead page finished, not because she'd been watching his room, because she was on the floor for a separate patient, and she heard the alarm pattern, and she knew, the way she always knew things by their patterns, exactly what it was. Weston was paged. He was in the OR and couldn't leave. The covering surgical resident, a third-year named Dr. Felix Okafor, arrived at a run and found Maya already at the Admiral's bedside, already running a secondary assessment, already noting the specific presentation of the bleed. What do we have? Okafor asked, pulling on gloves. Secondary hemorrhage, left upper quadrant. His pressure's dropping, but the rate is slowing. This isn't catastrophic yet. He needs fluid resuscitation, packed red cells on standby, and someone needs to reach Weston for a decision on return to OR. She was already adjusting the IV flow rate. His last hemoglobin was 11.2 at 0700. I'd want a repeat stat. Okafor looked at her for a half second. The half second where people decided whether to argue or move, and he moved. I need a stat hemoglobin, type and cross, 2 large-bore IVs. Get me Weston on the phone. The room became controlled chaos, which was the only kind of chaos that was survivable. Maya ran the practical end. Lines, positioning, monitoring, the constant recalculation of inputs and outputs that kept a patient stable while decisions were being made above her pay grade. She didn't stop to think about Solis. She didn't stop to think about Hatch, or Webb, or the review hearing, or the financial records on the hard drive currently sitting in a federal safe house 15 minutes away. She thought about the Admiral's blood pressure, his respiratory rate, the color of his nail beds, the specific texture of his pulse. He was conscious. That was something. Carter? His voice was strained but present. Don't talk, she said. You told me. I know what I told you. 4 o'clock, I said. I was off by 2 hours. Don't talk. Something moved across his face that might have been amusement, which was probably not the appropriate physiological response to active internal bleeding, but she'd take it over the alternative. Weston called back from the OR. Okafor talked him through the presentation. The decision came back within 4 minutes. Aggressive medical management first, return to OR only if pressure didn't stabilize within 30 minutes. It stabilized in 22. The hemoglobin came back at 9.8, which was low but workable. They pushed 2 units of packed cells and adjusted his pressors, and by 2:45 the immediate crisis had resolved into a situation that required monitoring but not intervention. Okafor stood at the foot of the bed looking slightly wrecked. Good catch, he said to the room in general. She told me yesterday afternoon, the Admiral said from the bed. His voice was rough, and he was pale, and he looked like a man who had been reminded sharply of his own mortality, which was usually what internal bleeding did. She said 4 o'clock. It was 2:50, Okafor said. She was close. Okafor looked at Maya with an expression that was difficult to categorize, not quite awe, more like recalibration. Have you worked in surgical recovery before? Not specifically, she said, which was true in the way that technically accurate things were true. She left them with the Admiral's nurse and went back to her own floor. What? Hatch arrived at Ravenwood at 3:30, not in a government vehicle this time, but in a nondescript rental, wearing a blazer instead of her usual sharp professional armor. She looked like a pharmaceutical rep or a hospital administrator, which was presumably the point. She found Maya in the supply corridor outside the ER, and they stood together in the narrow space between metal shelving and the far wall, speaking quietly. Solis made 3 calls after he left the hospital this morning, Hatch said, without preamble. We had his phone flagged after the file access. 2 of those calls went to numbers associated with Meridian Defense Group's internal communications network. And the third? A number we're still working on. It's routed through 2 relay points. We'll have it in a few hours. Hatch looked at her steadily. Whatever Crane is planning, the timeline just accelerated. We think he's going to try to discredit the review hearing before it starts. How? 2 options. Either he surfaces something about you that makes the review panel hostile before you walk in, fabricated or real, it doesn't matter, the damage is in the delay it creates. Or he goes after the Admiral's credibility directly. A pause. There's a third option, which is the one I'm most concerned about. He goes after the evidence, Maya said. The safe house was under surveillance this morning. We spotted it, pulled back the exterior team so it looked like we hadn't, but whoever was watching now knows we have a location. Hatch crossed her arms. The drives can't stay there. Where are they? We moved them an hour ago. They're with a federal courier under escort to the regional DOJ office. Hatch held her gaze. Copies only. The originals are still in transit. Maya absorbed that. You kept the originals moving. It's what I'd do. In your position. A slight pause. The first thing that had felt remotely personal in Hatch's operational precision. You've been doing this alone for a long time. I wasn't doing anything. I was being a nurse. You were keeping evidence alive and staying alive yourself, and maintaining a cover identity while running continuous threat assessment on a situation that had no official support structure. Hatch's voice was dry but not unkind. That's not nothing. Maya looked at the metal shelving, saline bags, wound care supplies, the ordinary inventory of a functional emergency department. She thought about the fact that she'd walked past this shelf 4 times a day for 18 months, and the ordinariness of it had been a choice, an active, ongoing, effortful choice to stay ordinary. What do you need from me? She asked. The review hearing, Hatch said. We've been trying to move up the date. We're hitting resistance. From Crane's people. From people who don't know they're Crane's people. That's the insidious part. He's been working through official channels, using bureaucratic friction as a weapon. Every request we make gets routed to someone who flags it for additional review, and every flag costs us 4 to 7 days. Hatch shifted her weight. At this rate, the hearing happens on the original date, or it doesn't happen at all. 3 weeks. Or less, if we can find a different approach. She looked at Maya directly. Is there anything in those files that we could use to compel an emergency session? Something specific enough and recent enough that the review board can't sit on it? Maya thought about it, about the financial records, about the specific routing of the Meridian contracts and the dates on them. The recontracting records, she said. 2 of the contracts are dated within the current fiscal year. That makes them active, not historical. And 2 of the signatory names are currently serving DoD officials. Hatch went very still. Currently serving, she repeated. One of them sits on the Defense Acquisition Board. The supply corridor was quiet for a moment except for the distant sounds of the hospital working around them. A cart rolling down the main corridor, a PA system page, the steady background noise of people doing necessary work. If that's in the files, Hatch said carefully, and if those contracts can be tied to the Sandline decision, they can be. That's what Arden's video does. He names the contract specifically. He didn't know what they were, but he described them, and with the financial records as context, the connection is clear. Maya paused. I've known this for 2 years. I've been waiting for the standing to surface it. The Admiral's investigation gives you the standing. The Admiral's investigation gives us the standing, she said, provided the Admiral doesn't have another internal bleed before we can use it. Hatch's expression shifted, something quick and involuntary, and then controlled. How is he? Stable, for now. Maya straightened up from where she'd been leaning against the shelf. I need to get back to the floor, but there's something else. She told Hatch about Solis in the hallway, about the recognition, about her read that he'd report back fast and that Crane's response time would be shorter than they'd estimated. Hatch listened without interrupting. I had the same read, she said when Maya finished. Webb is trying to track his current location. As of 40 minutes ago, Solis had left the hospital and not returned. He's not coming back, Maya said. He got what he came for. Which was what? Confirmation that I'm here, that I'm exposed, and that the Admiral's people have made contact. She moved toward the corridor door. He needed to see all 3 things to justify whatever Crane's next step is. She pushed through the door and walked back onto the floor. The shift ended at 7. She signed out her patients, gave Donna a clean handoff, and was walking toward the parking structure when she felt the shift in the air behind her. Not sound exactly, more like the particular quality of attention that had a direction. She didn't turn. She turned left instead toward the hospital's main building, through the lobby, past the gift shop, and took the internal corridor to the east wing rather than walking through the parking structure alone. She came out on the far side of the building near the ambulance bay, and there was a car there, not an SUV, a gray sedan, government plates, engine running. Webb was in the driver's seat. Get in, he said when she was close enough. She got in. He drove 2 blocks before he spoke. Hatch called. We found the 3rd number from Solis's calls. And? It's a law firm, Garver Locke and Associates, DC-based. They represent approximately 40% of Meridian Defense Group's government-facing contract work. He turned onto a main road heading west. But that's not why Hatch called. Maya waited. The 3rd call wasn't to the firm. It was to someone at the firm. A paralegal named Deanna Rourke, who has been working there for 6 years and who, we just found out, has also been providing information to a House subcommittee conducting a separate inquiry into DoD contracting irregularities. He glanced at her. An inquiry that was quietly shelved 8 months ago. Shelved by who? The subcommittee chair, Congressman Aldrich Mays. The name landed with the particular weight of a thing you've been waiting to hear confirmed. He's one of the signatories, Maya said, on the Meridian contracts. We know. Then he didn't shelve the inquiry because it was going nowhere. He shelved it because it was getting close. We know that too. Webb stopped at a red light. Hatch thinks Rourke was Crane's canary in the subcommittee. She was feeding them information about the inquiry's progress so they'd know when to pull the plug. He paused. What we don't know is whether Rourke knows that's what she was doing. She may have genuinely thought she was working for legitimate oversight. Or she may have known exactly what she was doing and gotten cold feet. The call from Solis was 47 seconds long. Maya thought about that. 47 seconds was too short for a debrief and too long for a hang-up. It was the length of a warning. He told her something was moving, she said. He told her the situation was escalating and she needed to decide where she stood. That's Hatch's read too. What did Rourke do after the call? Webb was quiet for a moment. She booked a flight to Denver, he said, arriving tonight at 9:52. The sedan moved through the evening traffic. Denver at dusk, the mountains barely visible in the orange haze to the west, the city doing its ordinary evening things around them. Maya looked at the streets passing and thought about a paralegal on a plane, making a decision about which side of something she wanted to be on when it resolved. She's coming to you, Webb said. Hatch thinks she's going to want to talk. Or she's coming to warn Solis that we're on to him. That's also possible. Where is Solis now? Downtown hotel. We have eyes on him. Webb turned into the safe house neighborhood. Hatch wants to know if you'll meet with Rourke. Depends on what she brings. Hatch thought you'd say that. Hatch thinks ahead. I appreciate that. Maya watched the residential street slide past. What time does Hatch want us at the safe house? She said, whenever you're ready, but he paused in a way that had something in it. There's one more thing. Something she wanted to tell you in person. Tell me now. Another pause. The review hearing. Hatch submitted an emergency acceleration request this afternoon, citing the active contracting irregularities. The request went to a 3-judge federal review panel. He pulled into the safe house garage. They responded 2 hours ago. The hearing's been moved up. The garage door closed behind them. When? Maya asked. 72 hours, he said. Day after tomorrow. She sat with that for a moment in the darkened garage, the engine ticking as it cooled. 72 hours. Not 3 weeks. Not time to build slowly and carefully and on her terms. 72 hours and a paralegal on a plane with unknown intentions, and Solis in a downtown hotel, and Crane somewhere doing whatever Crane did when things stopped going the way he'd arranged them. She got out of the car. Webb was already at the interior door, holding it open. The safe house lights were on inside. She could see Hatch through the doorway, standing at the whiteboard, on the phone. Maya walked in. And then she saw who was sitting at the table. It wasn't Hatch's team. It wasn't a federal agent or a DOD liaison or anyone from the apparatus that had been assembling itself around her life for the past 36 hours. It was a man she hadn't seen in 3 years, a man who was supposed to be dead, who had been listed in the after-action report as killed in action during Operation Sandline, whose name she had read in official documentation with her own eyes and carried in her chest like a stone. Tate Arden looked up from the table. He looked older. He looked like someone who had been through something that didn't have a clean name. He had a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his jaw that hadn't been there the last time she'd seen him. And he was thinner, and his eyes had the quality of someone who had spent a long time being extremely careful. He looked, in other words, like her. "Hey, Carter," he said. She stood in the doorway and said nothing for a moment that went on longer than it should have. Then she said, "You're supposed to be dead." "Yeah," he said. "I know. I've been working on that." "The video," she said. "On the drive. You filmed it the morning before?" "The morning before I went into exfil through a separate channel, one they didn't know about." He held her gaze. "I couldn't tell you. If you'd known I was alive, you would have come back. And if you'd come back, they would have had you both." She crossed the room and sat down across from him and looked at his face and thought about 3 years of carrying his name like a weight she'd never been able to set down. "I'm going to be furious with you about this," she said. "I know." "Later," she said. "Right now, tell me everything you have." He opened the folder on the table in front of him. It was thick. It was the kind of thick that came from someone who had spent 3 years doing exactly what she'd been doing, collecting, documenting, surviving, from a different angle. Crane didn't just authorize the abandonment, Arden said. He planned it. The entire mission was designed to fail in a specific way, at a specific time, to open a specific contracting window. They needed the operation classified as a loss so they could justify a budget reallocation that went to Meridian 6 weeks later. He turned to the first page. "And there's someone else. Someone above Crane." Hatch appeared in the doorway behind Maya. "That's what we couldn't confirm," Hatch said. "Until tonight." Maya looked at the page. A name. A title. A position she recognized. Her hands were not steady, but she looked at Arden, and she looked at the folder, and she thought, 72 hours. "All right," she said. "Start from the beginning." Arden talked for 2 hours and 19 minutes. Maya knew the duration because she watched the clock on the wall behind his head, not obsessively, but the way you track time when you're building a structure in your mind, and you need to know how much material you're working with. She didn't interrupt much. She asked 3 questions, each one precise, each one landing in the gaps where his account needed weight to hold. Hatch sat at the end of the table with a legal pad and wrote constantly. Webb stood by the door for the first hour, then pulled up a chair around the 90-minute mark when it became clear this wasn't going to be brief. The name on the page was Deputy Undersecretary Warren Callis. Callis had been at the Defense Acquisition Board for 11 years. He was 61, well-regarded, the kind of institutional figure who appeared in congressional testimony as a voice of reasonable moderation and whose name appeared in serious policy publications with adjectives like thoughtful and experienced. He had a wife, 2 adult children, a house in McLean, and a financial relationship with Meridian Defense Group that had been hidden inside a nonprofit foundation he'd established 14 years ago. Before Sandline, before any of this, the infrastructure of corruption built patiently and in advance. Arden had found him by following the money from a different direction than Hatch's team had been looking. He'd been tracking a series of small payments, not the major contracting allocations, which were the obvious thread, but the operational maintenance payments, the ones that kept informants active and cover stories current and surveillance ongoing. Those payments had a different pattern. They were irregular, cash equivalent, routed through a structure that was designed to look like charitable disbursements. It took me 14 months to find the foundation, Arden said. Another 6 to establish the link to Callus that would hold up in front of a review panel. He turned another page. Crane's the weapon. Callus is the hand holding it. And Mays? Hatch asked. Congressman Aldrich Mays, the subcommittee chair who'd killed the contracting inquiry 8 months ago. Mays is the door, Arden said. He doesn't drive anything. He just makes sure certain things don't get looked at. He paused. He probably thinks he's the least culpable person in the room. He's wrong, but he thinks it. Maya had been quiet for the last 20 minutes. She was looking at the whiteboard, at the web of it, at the way the 3 names sat in relation to each other, and in relation to what had happened 3 years ago in a zone that wasn't on any map she was currently authorized to see. Callus will know the hearing was moved up, she said. By morning, Hatch confirmed. The acceleration request went through official channels. He has access. Then he'll move tonight. We believe so. We have eyes on, not on Callus, on us. Maya turned from the whiteboard. He's had people watching this investigation for months. He knows what we have in general terms, but he doesn't know about Arden. He doesn't know about the Foundation records. She looked at Arden. Does he know you're alive? I don't think so. Crane doesn't know. If Crane doesn't know, Callus doesn't know. Arden's expression was careful. But Solis getting eyes on this location today changed the geometry. Solis is Crane's asset, not Callus's, Webb said. At this level, those 2 categories overlap more than they don't, Maya said. What's the status on Rourke? Hatch checked her phone. Flight landed 40 minutes ago. She's in a car. ETA to the location we gave her is 20 minutes. You gave her this location? A secondary location, safe enough. Webb's team is there. Hatch set the phone down. If she has anything useful, we'll know within the hour. Maya turned back to the board. She was thinking about 72 hours and about the way that timeline had just effectively become something shorter, because timelines always compressed under pressure, and pressure was the one resource in this situation that was not in short supply. We need to front-load the submission, she said. The financial records, Arden's testimony, the video. We don't wait for the hearing to surface any of it. We submit everything to the review panel tonight, on the record, with a request for protective custody of material witnesses. She looked at Hatch. That way, if they try to move on any of us before the hearing, it's already in the system. The evidence exists independent of our physical presence. Hatch was already nodding. I've been thinking the same thing. I wanted your agreement before I initiated. You have it. A pause. I want to write the submission myself. Hatch didn't argue, which told Maya she'd expected it. Fun. They worked through the night, not elegantly. There was nothing elegant about it. The safe house kitchen became a working space, the table covered in documents and laptops, and the remains of takeout that Webb had somebody bring at around 10 p.m. Maya wrote and Arden cross-referenced, and Hatch organized the legal framework, and Webb managed the logistics of document transfer to the review panel's secure server, while also managing his team at the secondary location where Rourke had arrived at 10:47, pale and clearly frightened and, as it turned out, carrying a thumb drive in her coat pocket that she'd been holding for 8 months without knowing exactly when or how to use it. Webb called in from the secondary location at 11:30. Rourke's talking, he said. She didn't know she was a canary. She thought she was doing oversight work. When Solis called her today, He told her the woman she'd been feeding information about, the one in the sealed file, had surfaced, and that things were about to get complicated, and that she should sit tight and wait for further instructions. A pause. She didn't sit tight. "What's on the drive?" Hatch asked. "Correspondence. Internal subcommittee communications from the period before Mays killed the inquiry. She kept copies because she thought something was wrong, but couldn't prove it." Another pause. "There are 3 emails from Mays's personal account, not his official one, to an address that routes to the Garver Locke firm. Directly to Crane's legal cover," Maya said, from across the table. Yes. It was, she thought, the particular way that large, careful structures fell apart, not from the outside in, but from the inside. From the person who'd been kept just close enough to be useful and just far enough to be deniable, who one day decided that deniable was not the same as protected. "Tell Rourke she did the right thing," Maya said. Webb relayed it. There was a pause, and then he said, "She says she wants to know if she's going to be okay." Maya looked at Hatch. "Tell her we'll do everything we can to make sure she's treated as a cooperating witness," Hatch said. Which is the truth. It wasn't a guarantee. They all knew it wasn't a guarantee, but it was the truth, which was what was available. The submission went to the review panel's secure server at 3:14 a.m. It was 112 pages of documented evidence, organized by date, cross-referenced by financial instrument, and anchored by Arden's eyewitness testimony, and the 18-minute video that Tate Arden had filmed on a personal device 3 years ago in a building in a country whose name would appear redacted in the public record, but fully spelled out in the classified version that the panel would receive. Maya sent it, and then sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "What happens now?" Arden asked. He was across the table with his coffee, which he'd been nursing for 2 hours. "Now we wait for them to review and confirm receipt. And then we sleep for a few hours because the hearing is in less than 2 days and I need to be functional." She rubbed her eyes. "And then I go to work." He stared at her. "You're going back to the hospital." "I have a shift at 6. Maya, Tate." She looked at him, and there was something in it that was almost gentle and also absolutely immovable. "I will be furious with you about the 3 years. I will have a lot of feelings about the fact that you were alive and I didn't know. I am going to need time to figure out what to do with all of that." She paused. "But right now I have patience and a job, and the best thing I can do for this situation is look exactly like what I've been for 18 months, until the moment I walk into that hearing room." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his coffee. "You were always better at the staying still part," he said. "You were always better at the running," she said. "Between us, we managed." It was the closest either of them came that night to saying anything about the 3 years. It was enough. She slept 3 hours on the safe house couch, which was less than ideal and more than she'd expected to manage. She was at Ravenwood by 5:50, changed and charted and doing morning med rounds by 6:15. The floor felt different. She couldn't have said exactly why. The physical space was identical, the rhythms the same, the smell of the place unchanged. But she was aware of it differently, the way you become aware of the weight of a thing once you know you're close to setting it down. Donna Reyes arrived at 6:30 for handoff and looked at Maya with the particular assessment that Donna brought to everything. "You slept," Donna said. "A little. You look like someone who slept a little and is running on something else." "Coffee." "That's not what I mean." Donna took the handoff tablet. "DOD people were here at 6. Before the shift change, they talked to administration." Maya paused. "Which DOD people?" "Not Webb. Different ones. 2 of them in the kind of suits that mean they want to talk to someone in charge." She met Maya's eyes. "Fitch took the meeting. I don't know what was said, but he came out looking like a man who'd been handed something he didn't know how to hold." Maya processed that. Callous moving through official channels, then trying to create friction at the institutional level before the hearing. Not Webb's team, not Hatch's, but someone operating through a different DOD pathway to put pressure on the hospital's willingness to cooperate. "Did they ask about me specifically?" Fitch didn't say, but he's been in his office since. A pause. Bosch went in to see him about 45 minutes ago. That was a particular combination. Fitch rattled and Bosch attentive to the rattling was a combination that produced a specific kind of institutional outcome, and Maya had a reasonable sense of what it looked like. She found out at 8:15 when Fitch's assistant came to the floor to say that Mr. Fitch would like to see her at her earliest convenience, which meant immediately. Fitch's office had a view of the parking structure and a diploma's wall, and the particular carpet of an administrative space that nobody had updated in 15 years. He was behind his desk when she came in, and Bosch was in one of the visitor chairs, and there was a third person Maya didn't recognize. A man in his 40s, DOD identification already clipped to his lapel, the kind of face that gave nothing. "Miss Carter," Fitch said, "please sit down." "I'm fine standing." It came out the same way it always did, without edge, just factually. Fitch glanced at Bosch, who looked at his hands. The DOD man didn't move. "We've received a request from the Department of Defense to review your credentialing and employment records," Fitch said, "given the circumstances of the past several days." "What kind of review?" "A comprehensive audit of your hiring process, your nursing licensure, your prior employment verification." He picked up a piece of paper and put it down again. "Miss Carter, I want to be straightforward with you. We've been informed that there are irregularities in your background that may have implications for your fitness to practice in this facility." She looked at the DOD man. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized, the expression of someone who had been sent to watch and report whether this worked. "Informed by who?" she asked. "The request came through official DOD channels." "That's not what I asked." Fitch's jaw tightened slightly. "The requesting officer is a deputy undersecretary. Warren Callis," she said. The room went still. The DOD man's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it. "You know this name," Fitch said carefully. "I know this name." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Fitch, I need you to understand something. The request you received this morning is not a legitimate credentialing audit. It is an attempt by a federal official who is currently under investigation to pressure this institution into taking an adverse employment action against a witness in that investigation before a scheduled federal review hearing." She paused. "If you take any action against my employment in the next 72 hours, this hospital and its administration will become material to that investigation." Fitch opened his mouth. "I'd recommend," she continued, "that before you respond to that request, you contact your legal department and ask them to look up the name Warren Callis in connection with the sealed federal file number." She turned toward the door. "I have patience." "Miss Carter," Bosch, surprisingly. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before, something that was working through several things at once and hadn't resolved yet. "The commendation from the Admiral's office. I've been thinking about it." She waited. "I should have listened to you in the trauma bay," he said. "Not because it turned out you were right, because you presented the clinical reasoning and I dismissed it before I'd evaluated it." He said it the way someone says a thing they've been constructing for a while and are not entirely comfortable with. "That's on me." It wasn't an apology exactly. It was the factual acknowledgement of an error, which from Bosch was probably the closest available equivalent. "Thank you," she said. "I'm not asking you to... I don't need..." He stopped. "Just for what it's worth." "It's worth something," she said honestly, and she left. The DOD man from Fitch's office left the hospital at 9:03. Maya tracked his exit through the lobby windows while she was doing a patient consultation near the nurses' station. She texted Hatch with the time and direction. Hatch responded 7 minutes later. "Confirmed. Callis initiated the credentialing request at 0540 this morning. We have it logged. It's been added to the submission." Maya put her phone away. At 10:15, she was in the middle of a wound assessment in Bay 4 when Donna appeared at the curtain. Donna's face was doing the thing it did when something had happened that required Maya's immediate attention but couldn't be announced publicly. Maya finished the wound assessment properly because the patient in Bay 4 had a wound that needed assessing, and that fact did not change based on anything happening in the larger situation. Then she stepped out. "Admiral's floor," Donna said quietly. Something's happening up there. Webb called down looking for you. She took the stairs. The surgical recovery floor was not in crisis. No alarms, no rapid response. But there were two people she didn't recognize stationed at the entrance to the corridor that led to Voss's room, and they had the kind of alert posture that came from specific training, and Webb was standing at the nurse's station talking to the floor charge nurse with barely controlled urgency. "What happened?" Maya asked when she reached him. "Someone tried to access the Admiral's room at 0930, Webb said, his voice low. "Presented as a consulting cardiologist. The floor nurse asked for identification, and the man left before providing it." He looked at her. "We have him on camera. It's Solis." She absorbed that. Solis personally. Which means whatever Crane told him to do last night, he's escalating it. He moved away from the nurse's station, drawing her with him. "Hatch is pulling Solis in. We have enough for a material witness hold with the submission on record. But it means Crane knows we're moving. And Callis knows Crane's been picked up. Within the hour, probably." She looked at the door to the recovery corridor. The two people she didn't recognize were Hatch's. She understood that now. The Admiral needs to be moved. Hatch is working on a medical transfer to a federal facility. He's 36 hours post-complication from a grade 4 splenic laceration. A transfer carries risk. She thought about it, the medical reality of it, the specific risk profile of moving a patient in his condition versus the risk of leaving him in an unsecured location. How long until the transfer can be arranged? 4 hours minimum. Then he needs continuous monitoring, and I want the transfer team briefed on his current status before they move him. She was already calculating. "Get me his most recent labs." Webb got her the labs. She stood at the nurse's station and read them and thought about physiology and logistics simultaneously, which was not comfortable but was manageable. "He's stable enough to transfer if the receiving facility is equipped," she said. "I want to talk to the transfer physician personally before they move him. I'll arrange it. And I want to see the Admiral before the transfer." Webb looked at her. "He's been asking for you." "I know he has." She handed the labs back. "Give me 10 minutes with my floor first." She was back downstairs and back to her patients, and back to the ordinary choreography of the ER for the next 2 hours. And it was almost surreal, the way the hospital continued its work regardless. The way people came through the doors with their ordinary emergencies and their ordinary pain and needed ordinary clinical attention that had nothing to do with federal hearings or compromised officials or the specific wait of 3 years. She was good at her job. She had been good at it before she was a nurse, in different contexts, and the skills transferred in ways she'd found surprising when she first arrived at Ravenwood. The patience, the reading of a room, the ability to assess what was actually wrong rather than what presented as wrong. The capacity to stay functional in conditions that warranted panic. At 12:40, she went up to see Voss. He was awake and had the particular alertness of someone running on institutional coffee and the awareness that things were in motion. He looked better than he had yesterday. Better color, more present, and he tracked her from the door in a way that said he'd already been briefed on this morning's events. "Solis," he said when she sat down. "They're picking him up now. He won't give them Crane directly. He doesn't have to. The submission already has Crane." She looked at him. "You're being transferred this afternoon. Federal medical facility, better security. You're stable enough to move if they do it carefully." "I don't want to move." "I know. You're moving anyway." He looked at her for a moment with something in his expression that was old and tired and also something else. The residue, maybe, of a long effort finally finding its footing. "Arden," he said. "Hatch told me he's alive." "Yes. How are you with that?" She thought about how to answer honestly without performing a feeling she was still locating. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm glad he's alive. The rest of it I'll figure out when there's time." Voss nodded. He understood that kind of accounting. The things you set aside because the situation doesn't leave room for them yet, and the knowledge that the room will eventually have to be made. "The hearing," he said, "tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll be there." "You'll be in a federal medical facility." "I'll be at the hearing." He said it with the quiet finality of a man who had made decisions under worse conditions and wasn't interested in discussion. "It's my testimony that anchors everything else. The review panel needs to see me in that room. She held his gaze. Your body is 36 hours past a significant surgical intervention. I'm aware of my body, Carter. Then you know what I'm going to say about the risk. Say it anyway. She said it anyway. The specific risks, the monitoring requirements, the conditions under which a transfer to the hearing location rather than the federal facility could be managed without putting him in danger. She was thorough. She was clinical. She didn't soften it. He listened to all of it. What do you need from me medically to make it workable? He asked when she finished. A physician from the federal facility traveling with you, current labs before departure, an IV line maintained in transit, and if you show any sign of pressure drop or increased pain, you go to the nearest ER regardless of the hearing. Agreed. I need that agreed to be real, not tactical. It's real. A pause. Are you going to be there? At the hearing? Yes, she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud with that particular finality. Yes, I'm going to be there. Solis was formally detained at 2:18 p.m. Webb sent her a text with the time, and she read it in the corridor outside Bay 7 and then pocketed her phone and went back to work. At 4:45, Hatch called. Crane's lawyer called the review panel this afternoon, Hatch said, filed an emergency motion to delay the hearing, citing insufficient notice and procedural irregularity in the acceleration request. Her voice was controlled but tight. The panel is considering it. Maya stood near the exit stairwell where she'd taken the call. On what grounds can they grant that motion? The acceleration was unusual. If the panel decides the grounds were insufficient, the grounds are 112 pages of documented federal contracting fraud and the live testimony of a witness who was listed as killed in action, Maya said. What additional grounds do they need? I know, I'm making that argument. A pause. But Crane's lawyer is good, and the motion has language in it that suggests they have information about how the acceleration request was submitted that concerns them. Another pause, and this one had something different in it. Maya, there may be a leak. Someone who knew the submission was coming and gave Crane's team enough to work with for the motion. Maya thought about who had known the submission was coming. Webb, Hatch, Arden. The review panel members who'd received it at 3:14 a.m. Rourke, who'd been at the secondary location and would have known in general terms that something was being filed. And Fitch. She'd told Fitch this morning to look up the hearing in connection with Callis. She hadn't told him about the submission specifically, but she'd told him enough to know that a hearing existed and that it was imminent. Fitch, she said. Silence on Hatch's end for exactly 2 seconds. He called someone after you left his office, Hatch said carefully. We flagged a call from his office line at 9:22 to a number that routes to Garver Lock. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not in surprise. She wasn't surprised. She was just calibrating. He didn't know what he was doing, she said. He was rattled, and he called someone he thought was a neutral party, probably someone who'd positioned himself as a contact over months or years for exactly this kind of situation. Probably, Hatch agreed. It doesn't make the motion go away. No, she opened her eyes. How long does the panel have to rule on the motion? By end of business today. If they don't rule by 6 p.m., the hearing stays on schedule by default. It was 5:07. Let them rule, Maya said. We can't do anything about the motion. Either the evidence holds or it doesn't. It holds. I believe it holds. Hatch's voice was careful. I just want you prepared for the possibility that tomorrow is more complicated than we planned. When has it been otherwise? A short pause. Fair enough. Another pause, and then, Deanna Rourke is going to testify. She confirmed it an hour ago. She wants immunity, which her attorney is negotiating, but she's going to testify. Good, Maya said. And Arden is formally listed as a material witness. His existence is no longer a secret from Crane's team as of the motion filing. They'll know he's alive within the hour if they don't already. Arden can handle that? I know. A beat. Can you? Maya looked at the stairwell door. Through the small window in it, she could see the hallway of the ER, the ordinary motion of the department, Donna Reyes moving fast toward Bay 2 with a look that said something was happening that needed attention. "I have to go," she said. "Donna needs me." Maya. "I'll be at the hearing tomorrow, whatever the ruling is." She pushed the stairwell door open. "I've been waiting 3 years. I can wait one more night." She hung up and went to Bay 2. It was a chest pain patient, 63, diaphoretic, the particular presentation that required fast decisions and careful hands. She made the fast decisions. She used the careful hands. She talked to the patient the way she talked to all her patients. Directly, without condescension, with the specific kind of steady that came from actually being steady rather than performing it. At 5:58, her phone buzzed with a text from Hatch. "Panel ruled. Motion denied. Hearing is on. 9 a.m. At 6:02, the chest pain patient stabilized and was admitted to cardiology. At 6:15, Maya signed out her panel, gave Donna the handoff, and walked to the locker room. She sat on the bench in front of her locker for a moment. The locker room was empty and quiet in the way hospital spaces got at shift change when everyone was somewhere else. She looked at her hands. The steadiness in them was real, not managed. It had been real through most of this, which was either a quality she'd built, or something she'd been born with, or some combination that she'd long since stopped trying to categorize. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. A hearing room with a review panel and documented evidence and Arden's testimony and Rourke's and the Admiral's, and on the other side of it, Crane and Callis, and a structure that had been built over years to be durable and self-protecting. She thought about Bosch saying, "I should have listened to you," and how it had cost him something to say it, and how that cost was real even if the man was difficult. She thought about Priya Lund saying, "I want you to ask me." She thought about Donna saying, "Don't die," as a figure of speech, every shift. She opened her locker and changed out of her scrubs. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Not her regular phone, the secondary one, the one from the waterproof case. A number that shouldn't have had this contact. She stared at it. One text message, no sender identified. The kind of routing that meant someone had gone to significant effort to reach her on a line they shouldn't have known existed. "Don't go to the hearing. I can make this go away for both of us. You know how to reach me." See. She read it twice. Then she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She took a photograph of the screen, sent it to Hatch with the timestamp and the routing number, and typed back a single word to the unknown sender. "No." She pocketed the phone, closed her locker, and walked out into the evening. The night before the hearing, Maya didn't sleep. She didn't try to pretend otherwise. She sat in the safe house living room with a cup of tea that went cold and the secondary phone on the table in front of her, and she thought about the text message from Callis, "I can make this go away for both of us," and what it revealed about the man who sent it. Not strength, the opposite. A man who still believed at this late hour that the right combination of words could reroute a situation that had already moved past the point where words were the operative tool. Arden was in the other room. She could hear him occasionally. The creak of the floor, the sound of water running. He'd offered to sit with her and she'd told him she was fine, which was partially true and partially the kind of statement you made when you needed the space to not be fine without someone watching. She thought about Tate Arden and the 3 years and the scar along his jaw and the way he'd said, "I couldn't tell you," with the tone of someone who had rehearsed the explanation so many times it had become smooth in his mouth. And she thought about how the smoothness of it didn't make it wrong. He'd made a calculation. The calculation had kept him alive. She understood calculations. She still wasn't sure what to do with the grief that had sat inside her chest for 3 years wearing his name, now that it had nowhere left to go. Later. She'd said later, and she meant it. At 4:30 a.m., she made fresh tea and pulled the review submission up on her laptop and read it through for the 3rd time. Not because she'd missed anything, but because she needed to hold the shape of it in her mind, the full architecture of what they'd built. 112 pages. 3 years of Arden's collection, 2 years of her own, 8 months of Hatch's investigation, and the testimony of a paralegal named Rourke, who had not known she was being used until the day she decided to stop. It was enough. She believed it was enough. She closed the laptop at 5:15 and went to get ready. What? The Federal Review Building in downtown Denver was not impressive from the outside. a 6-story administrative structure with government standard windows and a lobby that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. Maya arrived at 8:20 in clothes she'd bought specifically for this, dark slacks and a gray jacket. Nothing that performed anything, just presentable. Webb met her in the lobby. Hatch was already upstairs. "Arden's here," Webb said, walking her to the elevator. "Rourke arrived 20 minutes ago with her attorney. The Admiral's transport arrived at 8:05. "How was the transport?" "He's ambulatory, complaining about the pace." "That's fine. Complaining is good output." She pressed the elevator button. "Callis?" "Not here. His attorney filed a response to our submission at midnight. 60 pages, mostly procedural objections." Webb glanced at her. "The panel read it. They're proceeding." The elevator opened. "And Crane?" she asked. "His attorney is present. Crane himself is under a material witness hold as of 6:50 this morning. He's being transported separately." The doors closed. "Congressman Mays submitted a written statement last night. He's not appearing in person." His attorney advised against it. "Almost certainly." The hearing room on the 5th floor was larger than she'd expected. A long table for the 3-member review panel, a witness area to one side, a section for attorneys and their clients, and a separate observation area where, she noted when she walked in, there were already a dozen people whose affiliation she couldn't immediately determine. Federal observers, legal staff, 2 people with the look of journalists who'd been briefed enough to know they should be present without yet knowing exactly for what. Hatch was at the far end of the room, talking to a woman in her 60s who wore the specific expression of someone who presided over difficult things with long practice. The panel chair, Maya assumed. Hatch caught Maya's eye across the room and gave a short nod. Admiral Voss was in a chair against the wall, in civilian clothes with an IV port on his left arm and a DOD physician sitting 2 feet away who was clearly under orders to intervene at the first sign of any physiological complaint. He looked alert and sat straight, and when Maya crossed the room to him, he looked at her with the particular expression he'd had in the trauma bay 9 days ago. Direct, decided, like a man who had been working toward this moment for a long time. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I'm exactly where I should be," he said. "That's not what I asked." "Pain is about a 4, he said. "Manageable. I'm not going to collapse in the middle of testimony. If you feel it going above a 6, I'll tell the physician." He met her eyes. "Sit down, Maya. You've done the hard part. Let the process do the rest." She sat down next to him, and they waited together in the particular quiet of a room filling up with the sound of a reckoning approaching. The hearing opened at 9:04, 4 minutes late, which felt about right. The panel chair was named Margaret Osei, federal review judge, 27 years on the bench, the kind of woman who had a reputation for patience with facts and none for patience with evasion. She opened with a procedural statement that took 6 minutes and made clear in the specific vocabulary of federal oversight exactly what the scope of the proceeding was. A classified review of documented contracting irregularities, personnel record manipulation, and actions taken in connection with Operation Sandline, with authority to refer findings to the Department of Justice and to make binding recommendations regarding the status of personnel records and professional standing of named individuals. Crane's attorney made an objection before the procedural statement was finished. Judge Osei looked at him the way you look at a clock that's chiming at the wrong time. "Noted," she said. "Overruled. Continue." The submission went into the record first. Osei had clearly read it. She referenced specific page numbers without looking at a copy, which told Maya everything she needed to know about how seriously the panel had taken the overnight filing. Then Rourke testified, with her attorney present and her immunity agreement on the record, and she was nervous and her voice shook twice, and she was also precise in the way that frightened people sometimes are when they've decided the fear of not speaking is worse than the fear of speaking. The subcommittee communications she'd preserved were admitted into evidence. The emails from Mays's personal account went in one at a time, each one landing in the record like a door closing. Crane's attorney objected 4 more times during Rourke's testimony. Osei noted and overruled each one with the efficiency of someone swatting flies during a meal. Then Arden testified. He walked to the witness area and sat down and looked at the panel with the same quality of aliveness that had struck Maya in the safe house. That he was here at all, that he had survived the specific gauntlet of the last 3 years and arrived in this room with his folder and his memory and his 18-minute video that was about to become part of a federal record. He was not polished. He stumbled once near the beginning, corrected himself, continued. He said at one point, when the panel's second member asked about the day of the abandonment, "I need a second." And he took the second, and then he spoke. The room was very quiet while he did. The video played on a screen at the front of the room. 18 minutes of Tate Arden's voice, recorded in a location that appeared on no official map, describing what he saw and what he heard and what he understood was happening, with the particular clarity of someone who knew in the moment that he was documenting something that might need to be documented. There were 3 minutes near the end where his voice broke, and he kept recording anyway. When it finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment that went on longer than standard procedural pauses. Then Osei said, "Thank you, Corpsman Arden," and moved forward. Voss testified for 31 minutes. He was precise and he was thorough. And there were moments where the weight of what he was describing settled visibly on his face, and he let it, which was the right thing to do and also, Maya suspected, not entirely a choice. He had been carrying this too. The shape of it on him was different than on her or Arden. It had the particular quality of guilt that came from surviving well, while others didn't. From having a career and a rank, while the people who saved you had nothing but the effort of surviving. But it was real, and the panel could see it was real, and that mattered. When the panel's third member asked him why he'd saluted Maya Carter in the trauma bay of Ravenwood Medical Center 9 days ago, in full view of the clinical staff, he was quiet for a moment. "Because she saved my life," he said. Again. "And because I needed everyone in that room to understand that the woman they'd been looking through for 18 months was someone they should have been looking at." He paused. "And because I was tired of the right thing staying invisible." Maya testified last. She walked to the witness area and sat down and looked at the panel and thought about all the rooms she'd sat in over the last 3 years where she'd had to be the version of herself that was manageable, containable, easy to dismiss. The version that ate granola bars and said, "I understand," and stepped back when she was told to step back. She answered every question directly. She was not performing composure. She was composed, which was different. The difference between a thing that was real and a thing that was held in place by effort. She walked the panel through the mission, through the abandonment, through the 3 years of keeping the evidence alive. She explained, when asked, why she hadn't come forward sooner, and her answer was accurate and unsentimental, because she'd needed standing and safety, and the structure to make it stick, and none of those things had existed until now. When the panel's first member asked how she'd maintained her nursing licensure and clinical competency during the period of her record erasure, she said, "I'd been doing battlefield medicine for 4 years before I was ever called a nurse. The skills transferred." "You never stop practicing," the member said. "You don't stop knowing how to help people," she said. "You just change where you do it." Crane's attorney tried to introduce a character challenge. He presented with visible confidence a document that purported to show a prior disciplinary action against Maya during her service record, something that would have suggested a pattern of insubordination, a foundation for the argument that her abandonment had been justified rather than punitive. Osei read the document. She looked at it for approximately 45 seconds. "This document," she said, "bears a date that precedes the establishment of the unit in which it claims to have been filed by 11 months. She set it down. "Counsel, I'd like to know where this was obtained." The attorney's confidence did not survive the question. What followed was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was procedural and precise, and therefore more damaging than drama, because procedural precision in a federal review room has a weight that shouting doesn't. The document was flagged for forensic review. 2 more of Crane's evidentiary submissions were pulled for similar review. By the time Osei called a recess at 12:40, the shape of the afternoon was clear to everyone in the room. Hollis Crane made a statement through his attorney during the recess. He accepted responsibility for certain decisions made under difficult operational conditions and expressed willingness to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for consideration of his cooperation. The statement was 6 paragraphs long and did not contain the word wrong or the word sorry once. Callis's attorney filed an emergency statement an hour later. Callis was, the statement explained, prepared to cooperate fully with the panel and had new information that might be useful to the investigation. He was requesting immunity from criminal prosecution in exchange for his testimony. The panel chair's response to Callis's immunity request was delivered in writing in language that was technically neutral and also unmistakably clear. The panel was not in a position to grant immunity. That was DOJ's authority. What the panel could do was make recommendations, and the panel's recommendations would be informed by the degree of cooperation extended voluntarily rather than under duress. Callis's attorney called back 40 minutes later to say his client wished to make a full statement. Maya was sitting in the corridor outside the hearing room with a cup of terrible vending machine coffee when Hatch came out and told her this. "He's going to give them Mays," Hatch said. "That's what he's trading. The specifics of how Mays killed the subcommittee inquiry." "And Mays will give them whatever's left," Maya said. "That's usually how it goes." Hatch sat down next to her. She looked tired in a human way, not a professional one. The kind of tired that came from months of building something carefully and then the specific exertion of watching it actually happen. "You did well in there." "I told the truth," Maya said. "It didn't require anything extraordinary. You'd be surprised how many people can't do it anyway." Hatch looked at the corridor wall. "For what it's worth, when I first got this file 14 months ago, I thought it was going to be another one that went nowhere. Too buried, too long ago. Too many people with too much institutional protection." She paused. "You made it impossible to let it go nowhere." "Arden made it impossible," Maya said. "He kept the video. That's the thing that changed everything." "You kept yourself," Hatch said quietly. "That was the other thing." Maya drank the terrible coffee. Woke. The panel reconvened at 3:15 and issued its preliminary findings at 4:52. The findings ran to 38 pages. Maya had a copy in her hands before the session formally closed, and she read the first 3 pages standing in the hearing room while people moved around her. The preliminary findings: Operation Sandline had been deliberately compromised at the command level for financial benefit. The abandonment of the medical team had been authorized with full knowledge of the personal risk to the individuals involved. The subsequent erasure of records and falsification of after-action reports constituted obstruction of a federal proceeding and abuse of official authority. The deaths and injuries resulting from the operation's mismanagement, including the death of Corpsman Tate Arden, officially recorded and now officially corrected, were the direct consequence of decisions made for reasons that had nothing to do with operational necessity. Hollis Crane referred to the DOJ for criminal prosecution on charges including fraud, obstruction, and conduct unbecoming. His security clearance revoked immediately. His consulting contracts with Meridian Defense Group flagged for federal investigation. Warren Callis referred to the DOJ. His cooperation noted. The panel recommendation was that the DOJ weigh that cooperation against the scale of the damage, which was the panel's careful way of saying his cooperation would help him, but probably not enough. The foundation that had been the vehicle for the financial arrangements was being dissolved under federal order, its assets frozen pending audit. Congressman Aldrich Mays referred to the House Ethics Committee and the DOJ simultaneously. His statement of voluntary cooperation was noted. The panel's language about him was the driest of all, dry in the way that federal documents sometimes are when the facts speak loudly enough that editorializing would be redundant. Garrett Solis referred to the DOJ for his role as an active operative in the surveillance and intimidation of witnesses in a federal proceeding. And then the last section, which was the one that mattered. The panel found that the service record of the individual identified in the classified file, Maya's name, her real name, both of them, written out in full and entered into a federal record that would not be sealed, had been unlawfully altered and should be restored in its entirety. The panel found that the characterization of her departure from service as desertion was false, unsupported by evidence, and a deliberate act of record manipulation. The panel recommended the restoration of her rank, her service record, and any benefits and professional standing to which she was entitled. The panel further found that her actions during Operation Sandline, including the medical care provided under hostile conditions, the preservation of evidence at personal risk over a 3-year period, and her cooperation with the current investigation reflected a standard of professional and personal conduct that warranted formal commendation. She read that paragraph twice. Then she folded the pages carefully and put them in her jacket pocket. Voss found her in this corridor after the session closed. He was moving slowly, the physician from the transport staying close but not intervening, and he looked like a man who had spent a significant portion of the day doing something effortful and was aware of the physical cost and had decided the cost was acceptable. He stopped when he reached her. "The record," he said. "I read it." "Your name is back." "Yes." He looked at her in the way that had too much in it to be a simple look. 3 years of carrying the thing that had been done to her, the salute in the trauma bay that had started all of this, the calculation he'd made when he'd chosen to make it visible. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said. "You already said that." "I know, I'm saying it again because once wasn't sufficient." She looked at him. This man who had been dying on a gurney 9 days ago and was standing in a federal corridor now because of a chain of events that had started with a blood-covered salute and ended here. And she thought about what it meant to be seen, not just recognized or vindicated or officially restored, actually seen by someone who had known what they were seeing. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting it stay buried." He nodded once. That was enough. The drive back to Ravenwood was quiet. Webb drove. Hatch was on the phone in the front seat, already managing the next layer of things. DOJ coordination, press containment, the machinery of consequence grinding into motion. Maya sat in the back and watched Denver move past the windows and thought about the specific texture of this moment, which was not triumphant in the way she'd imagined it when she'd imagined it at all. It was quieter than that, heavier. The way that the resolution of a long thing usually feels, not like a door opening, but like a weight being set down, and then the strange lightness that comes after, and then the question of what to do with your hands now that you've been carrying something for so long. Arden was in a separate car. They hadn't spoken after the hearing, not beyond a look across the corridor that had said more than either of them could have organized into sentences yet. Later. There would be later now, which was a thing she was still adjusting to. Her phone, her regular phone, her Maya Carter phone, buzzed with a text from Donna Reyes. "Heard something happened today. You okay?" She looked at the message for a moment. "Yes," she typed back. "I'll explain tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Donna replied. "You're on the 6 a.m. shift. Don't be late." She almost laughed. It came out as something smaller than a laugh, but real in the same way. She went back to work the next morning. 6 a.m., same as always, same hallways, same antiseptic smell, same coffee that was never quite right. She charted her patient panel and checked the overnight admits and reviewed the ER board for incoming cases and ate half a granola bar at 7:15 because she'd missed breakfast again. Donna was at the nurse's station and looked at her and said nothing for a moment, which from Donna was the equivalent of a long speech. "You're different," Donna said finally. "I'm the same." "You're the same and different," Donna said. "It's a specific thing. I've seen it before in people who've been carrying something they finally put down." She picked up her tablet. "The DOD commendation is in your file, by the way. Fitch's office sent it over this morning. He also sent an apology for, and I'm quoting, any actions that may have inadvertently compromised your professional standing." "Inadvertently," Maya said. "That's the word he used." "It wasn't inadvertent." "No," Donna agreed. "But it's what his lawyer told him to say, and it's on paper, and it's in your file." She tilted her head slightly. "Bosch also submitted something." Maya looked up. "What kind of something?" "A formal, written acknowledgement of your clinical contribution to the Voss trauma response, credited the diagnosis." Donna's expression was carefully neutral in the way it was when she was hiding something that wasn't entirely neutral. "He's not a changed man, but he put it in writing." Maya thought about that. About the distance between being right and being recognized for it, and about all the women who were right every day in rooms that never acknowledged it, and about the fact that paper in a file was not the same thing as a person actually seeing you, but was also not nothing. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Donna agreed. Dr. Lund appeared at the station at 7:30 with her characteristic efficiency and a coffee she'd gotten from somewhere better than the hospital machine. She set it on the counter in front of Maya without comment. Maya looked at it. "Priya," she said. "Don't make a thing of it," Lund said, already turning back to her charts. Maya drank the coffee. It was good. 3 weeks later, the DOJ announced formal charges. Hollis Crane, 7 counts, including fraud against the United States, obstruction of a federal investigation, and conspiracy. His bail was set and then contested and finally granted at a number that told the story of exactly how seriously the court was taking the case. Warren Callis resigned from his position the morning of the announcement, which was 4 hours before the announcement, which meant someone had told him it was coming. The resignation was described in his statement as voluntary and for personal reasons. The DOJ statement described it differently. Congressman Mays did not resign. He issued a statement expressing full cooperation and confidence in the investigative process. He also quietly removed himself from the Defense Acquisition Subcommittee. The Ethics Committee investigation was described as ongoing, which in Washington was the specific vocabulary of a thing that was going to take longer than it should, and end worse than the public statement suggested. Meridian Defense Group's federal contracts were suspended pending audit. 17 contracts, 11 currently active, totaling somewhere in the range of $400 million. The foundation Callis had used was dissolved. The audit was going to take a long time and produce findings that would take longer to fully surface, and the people responsible for managing it would do their work carefully and without fanfare, and eventually the results would become part of the public record. It was not perfect. Nothing about it was perfect. The machinery of consequence was slower than the machinery of damage had been, and some things that should have been caught earlier wouldn't be caught at all. And there would be people adjacent to all of this who would emerge without penalty because the evidence didn't reach them directly, and that was the specific unfairness that lived inside even the outcomes that went right. She knew that. She had always known that. It was still enough. Arden called on a Tuesday evening, 5 weeks after the hearing. She was in her apartment, the same neighborhood she'd chosen 18 months ago for its ordinariness, and kept now because it had become genuinely hers. She answered on the second ring. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," he said. "I know. 3 years is a long time to not say something to someone." "It is," she agreed. A pause. "Are you angry?" She thought about it honestly. "I was," she said. "The specific anger passed. What's left is—" She stopped. "I understand why you made the call. I'd probably have made the same call." A pause of her own. "That doesn't mean I'm not still working through what it was like to grieve you." "I know." His voice was quieter. "I'm sorry for that part." "I know you are." Another pause. "I've been offered a position," he said, "with Hatch's team, consulting. It's not service exactly, but it's adjacent," she said. "Yeah, a beat." "What about you?" She looked at her apartment, at the ordinary clutter of a life being lived, a book on the table, a half-finished cup of tea, her work bag by the door. Through the window, Denver at night, the mountains invisible in the dark, but there. "I'm staying," she said, "at Ravenwood." "At Ravenwood?" She thought about how to say the next thing, and then just said it. "I'm good at it, Tate. Not just because of what I was trained to do before, because I'm actually good at being a nurse. At this specific thing, in this specific place." A pause. "I spent 3 years thinking my life here was temporary. A cover. Something I'd leave when the other thing resolved." She looked at the cup of tea. "It's not temporary. It's mine." She heard him breathe out, the particular exhale of someone hearing something they'd been waiting to hear, even if they hadn't known they were waiting. "Good," he said. "That's good, Maya." The Admiral visited in October. He was fully recovered, fully being a relative term for a man his age who had sustained a grade 4 splenic laceration, but he was upright and mobile and had the color of a person whose body had decided to continue cooperating. He came to the hospital on a weekday afternoon, no security detail, just himself, and found Maya at the nurse's station. He waited until she finished what she was doing, which she appreciated. She took a 15-minute break and they sat in the break room with the bad coffee and the humming vending machine and the fluorescent light that flickered slightly at the far end, and they talked without the weight of everything that had preceded it. Just two people in an ordinary room. "They're going to ask you," he said, "about returning to service, some formal capacity. I've heard it discussed." "I know." "And?" "No," she said. He nodded. He'd expected it. "I'm not who I was when I did that work," she said. "I don't mean that as a loss. I mean it as a fact. What I am now, this is not a lesser version. It's just what I actually am." "A nurse," he said. "A nurse," she said, "who used to be other things, and who still carries all of it, and who has decided that carrying it here is what makes sense." He looked at her. "You know what people will remember about this." "Maybe." She shrugged. "A genuine one, not performative. I'm not interested in being remembered in a particular way. I'm interested in doing this correctly." She gestured vaguely at the break room, at the hospital beyond it. "Doing this correctly every day is the whole point." He was quiet for a moment. "You're the hardest kind of person to argue with," he said. "I know." "Because you're right. Usually," she said. And he almost laughed. And it was the closest thing to easy she'd felt in a very long time. He left after the 15 minutes were up, because she had patience, and she said so. He shook her hand at the door of the break room. Not a salute this time, just a handshake, person to person, the ordinary gesture of two people who had been through something together and were now going back to their lives. She watched him walk down the corridor, and then she went back to work. Later, weeks later, months, she would try to identify the moment things changed. People asked her in the ways they asked, and she never had a clean answer because clean answers required a single moment, and the truth was that it was a sequence of moments, each one small and most of them unremarkable. It was the Admiral's hand rising in the trauma bay. It was 3 years of keeping the evidence alive because there was nothing else to do with the grief. It was Tate Arden alive in a safe house, looking older and more worn and exactly himself. It was Donna Reyes saying, "Don't be late the morning after everything," as if the everything were simply a fact of life to be incorporated and moved past. It was Priya Lund setting a cup of coffee on the counter without explanation. It was the granola bar at the nurse's station, the charts, the bad coffee, the fluorescent light, the work of ordinary days done with the full weight of who she actually was. The world had a way of deciding that certain people were small, deciding it early, deciding it firmly, building systems around the decision so that it reinforced itself. And there were people who accepted that verdict because they had no other option, and people who fought it visibly and loudly and paid the price of visibility, and then there were people who did a third thing, who stayed and worked and carried what they knew about themselves in private and waited for the moment when the truth became too large to contain. Maya Carter had been that third thing. She had not saved herself through power or spectacle. She had saved herself through the specific discipline of not disappearing, even when disappearing would have been easier. Through showing up to the shift, through doing the work correctly, through staying in the room long enough for the room to catch up to who she was. That was the thing people kept missing about people like her. They expected the vindication to be the story. But the vindication was just the moment the rest of the world noticed what had always been true. She'd known who she was the whole time. The difference now was that everyone else knew too, and she had found, this was the part she hadn't expected, that it was possible to hold both things at once. The person she'd been before, with all that had cost her, and the person she was now, with everything she'd built in the ordinary hours of ordinary days. They weren't in conflict. They were the same person, continuous, surviving. On a Tuesday morning 6 months after the hearing, she walked into Ravenwood Medical Center at 5:58, changed into her scrubs, clipped her badge to her pocket, and went to find Donna for handoff. The ER was already busy. It was always already busy. She picked up her first chart of the day, read it through, and walked toward Bay 3 where a patient was waiting. And the work was the same as it had always been. Careful, difficult, necessary. And she did it the same way she'd been doing it for 18 months and more. Completely. Quietly. Without apology. As herself.